whether it has serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value for minors. Now, in order to remove the Bible, this committee would have had to have found that it did not have sufficient serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value for minors. Is that accurate?
Our understanding of it is that they would have made an age level determination in consideration of both the content and the value.
What
So
ages did they make the
they determined that it was
determination
appropriate for retention in high schools.
for? Only high schools.
Correct.
Okay. Now, if I go and I look at quotes from the book Freedom Writer's Diary, which was retained for junior high and high school, are you familiar with that book?
I'm not personally familiar with it, no.
I'm happy to put some excerpts up on it, just as a compare and contrast, because they allowed for it. I'm going to share my screen briefly. And frankly, I'm putting the excerpts up because I'm embarrassed to read them out loud. So starting at page 150. I'll give everyone just a second to read that. That was retained for junior high students. We'll just keep going. Now, under your review process, one of the committees found that this book had so much literary value that despite these excerpts, it should be retained for junior high students. Do you feel that that's appropriate?
So I wouldn't select this book for my junior high student, right? I think it invites the discussion of how do we give better clarifications to our committees, because this is likely 2 different committees of 7 people that are operating with different perspectives. Both come to the board ultimately if there's an appeal process.
Well, and then, so we've got this, and they're saying that that has enough serious literary value to bring in. Now, I look at the Bible and I think about the Gutenberg press. That was the most revolutionary point that essentially was the beginning of the Renaissance. I think of all of the art that was inspired by the Bible throughout the Renaissance. I think about our entire legal system, which is generally derived from the Bible. The English legal system is derived from the Bible. I think about the historical text derived from the Bible. I think about literacy, just the core issue of literacy, and the number of people that gained literacy merely by the fact that they were studying the Bible and that the Bible was the impetus for getting people to read, and the technological advances that came from that. I think about Michelangelo and the amazing things that he did, Handel, the Messiah, and they didn't find any serious literary value in the Bible. Your system is broken. I don't know how you get there without a broken system. There is no way to get there without a broken system or people out there to destroy the moral basis of our society. You cannot arrive there. There's absolutely no way. You should be ashamed that this system did this. When that appeal comes up there, it should be the shortest appeal that you've ever seen. And I hope that it comes quick and that you reverse this decision as fast as possible. Because if you're going to allow that type of horrific language before our junior high students, but you're not going to allow the Bible, given the standards that you've set, your standards are not being followed or the standards are not working. We'll help you clarify them, but frankly, this is embarrassing. It's embarrassing for the state, and it's embarrassing for the Davis School District.
Thank you, Representative Brammer. I appreciate those comments. I also have one more question, and then we will go back to the committee. When other books have not been retained, there's not ever been a announcement made to the press. Was the Bible announcement made to the press by the Davis School District that you were not going to retain the Bible?
I'll let the superintendent speak to that. My understanding was that it came about through grandma requests.
Yeah, we were asked that question by the press. You probably remember that when the Bible was first challenged in December, so it was over 4 months that the review committee had it. The press was constantly asking us where that was. I think we saw local and national press show interest in that in December. And as the policy was utilized, as the committee made the final decision, initially, we even believed that the decision, because we didn't know the details of it, when we heard that the Bible was retained, we thought that made a lot of sense. It wasn't until we realized that the rest of the decision was to limit it in retainment only to the high school. And let me be clear: the Bible is not banned in the Davis School District. Cigarettes, weapons, all kinds of things are banned in the Davis School District. Students can have the Bible at any level, and I think we know that the majority of those students that have the Bible have their own copy and don't rely on the schools. That said, I don't disagree with you, Senator. I don't know if anybody on this panel disagrees with you that it is embarrassing that this kind of a decision has made national attention for our district and for our state. We don't disagree with that. I think myself and many on this panel feel the same way that you do in terms of our admiration for the Bible. But I'm asking to please allow the policy to play out.
Another quick question. In finding that the Bible could not be retained for elementary and junior high, are you aware of the considerations? Do you know what considerations that they used to make this determination, so that we can make sure that going forward with law that we can correct any confusion that there may be?
Yeah, I think that's important to identify. If you want to look at the policy, the considerations for age appropriateness, those are in section 3.
While you're looking for that specifically,
Okay.
Superintendent,
On page 6.
okay, so how do you justify, you have the same criteria, the Bible gets banned, and that filth that we just saw on the screen, by any definition, saying that that's appropriate for a 13-year-old? It's not a matter of whether you would choose that reading material or not. It's whether these standards are being consistently applied by the Davis School District. Superintendent, how do you respond to that? You saw what was up there.
I did.
It was an embarrassment for Representative Brammer to read it. Shall we put it up and have you read it publicly so the media can have your quotes on the 5 o'clock news reading that filth? Verbatim with the F word and all the other anatomical descriptions? How do you respond to that?
I would say that, referring to what's been spoken earlier, that we rely on a committee process.
But that committee, how is it being, we heard, well, I wouldn't choose that literature. As a father of 6 and a grandfather of 19, this is offensive, sir. I don't live in the Davis School District. If I did, I would be taking appropriate advocacy actions as a parent, as a taxpayer in that district. But how do you answer the consistency of these standards? The argument or the excuse, well, they're different committees. These standards aren't different for the different committees, however many committees you have. These standards have the same definition for all of your committees. And if the only response is, well, I wouldn't choose that personally for a classroom, would you choose that for any classroom for a 13-year-old or a 12-year-old?
But we're not, Senator, we're not talking about choosing for classrooms, so I think it's really important to differentiate
Or
because.
for a library?
Right. So
for
those
a
are,
library for a 12-year-old, or
And-
you said junior high.
Yeah.
Would you choose that for any junior high student?
and I wouldn't if I were on a committee. And I'll also tell you that I think it's a little bit unfair to compare a book that's not finished with its final decision with that book. I think that book's a separate discussion. We need to have, is the clarity within the bright line bright enough? Or where is the lack of, understanding about what our community standards are? And we can have that discussion, but I think we cloud the issue when we take an unresolved situation with the Bible and apply it to other books that we're concerned about, because we want to work on those books.
But the decision was made, and now it's being appealed, and the decision, what is fair is the decision was made for that filth The same decision was made for the Bible. One allowed it, one didn't. That's the comparison that we're making, that these standards didn't change for the filth versus the Bible, and those standards are not being applied consistently.
Yeah, so I think the only way we could get, and I'd love to have a longer discussion and bring in experiences from other boards across the state that are grappling with this issue, because right now, because of the volume of books and the concern in our community, we're dealing with a lot of titles. And so to have a single committee with a single paradigm and the exact same parameters and accountability that they're operating under is difficult. We're talking about a wide variety of different perspectives weighing in on these committees. And so I think that's one of the challenges that we're facing, especially in a big district. We felt strongly, I'll tell you as a board, that we didn't want different standards applied if a book was challenged at one school. To your point, if it's not appropriate for my student, it wouldn't be appropriate at the school next door. Our community is small enough, despite having 90-plus schools, that we shouldn't have that disparity. So we're trying to tighten it in as we can, and we want to make it equitable, but we also want to make sure that we are within the confines of the law.
But President Mumford, I apologize, but isn't this why we have standards? And isn't it why, and particularly why I am happy to have you guys here to discuss this today, how does the public at large, how does this committee and any parent within your district across the state, how are they going to be able to review, were those standards and procedures followed? How can we get to that point so people can see that, yep, because typically I have found in anything in life, if people can understand the process, they might disagree with it, but at least they can respect that a process was followed. When there is no direction and no process for anyone to follow, there's nothing given for transparency, that is when parents, and that is when the community at large gets very upset. So can you explain how that policy and how your standards were followed?
Yeah, Dr. Toon's going to speak to that. I think one of the things that's always, and comes from, I believe, the state rule, but one of the expectations is that the community members bring their own experience and backgrounds. That's right in the code and the rule. And so until we can get to a place that's completely objective and delineates those things almost like a motion picture rating system, it's going to be really challenging for these committees because there is different backgrounds and perspectives coming to those. I'll let Dr. Toon speak to it more on a logistics level.
One of the thoughts that on this is we've heard regularly is how did the committee even arrive at this decision, and what was the considerations that went into that? Our current process is to release the committee decision date, the committee decision, and a statement of rationale relative to the legal criteria that the decision was made under. That has been sufficient communication for 59 decisions, and it is insufficient for the 60th, and maybe rightly so. So as we look at our internal practices, we will be looking at ways to share additional information on what was the specific ways that they considered value of the work as a whole, what were the specific ways they considered violence and vulgarity, and how those two things interface to make an age-level determination. That communication right now, like I said, has been sufficient to date and is now no longer, and that's okay, because we've been doing this for exactly less than a year, and we're willing to make the adjustments that we need in order to be responsive to our community. So that's forthcoming, but still certainly possible, and the policy support, yes.
You need to move the mic up closer so it sounds loud in your own ears. That way the people online can hear your statements.
Thank you, I apologize.
I appreciate your comments, and I guess that's my biggest concern, and something we need to look at as a legislature is the law should not be subject to interpretation from a committee. If that is how this filth is getting through our schools and into the hands of our children, then we need to change that, and we need to fix that, because it should never be just subject to the whims of a committee that is unelectable to the people that you guys represent. We have Representative Strong and Senator Andrag. And Senator Escamillas, we will get to you online as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate you guys coming today. It's a tough one for you, I understand. And if you answered this already, I apologize, but you have a committee of teachers and community members without, there's no election there for them, right? They're just chosen on this committee by random. When they're findings come back to the board, does the board have the final say?
So the way the policy's written is the committee decision is released, which is what you've seen with the Bible, and then there's an appeals period. And so if the board has the final say, because if it's appealed, then it escalates to the board appeal committee and then to a final vote by all 7 board members.
But could the board have, at that point, immediately rejected the committee findings?
So that's not a feature we have in our policy right now. We could add that component. We felt like by jumping in and superseding our own policy, it would compromise all the previous challenges that happened and possibly other religious texts or books of significant historical value. So we're staying with our policy at this point, but I think that's a reasonable thing for us to consider is if the board wanted to take, preemptive action after a committee decision.
Yeah, something you should probably add for sure. Who has the right to appeal? Anyone from the community?
No, so there's specific standing requirements.
I read a
Dr.
couple
Toon
of
could
them, yeah.
explain those.
Yeah.
Yeah, anybody who has a student in a school that is affected by the decision has a standing to appeal.
Okay. So I know that it's been, it's in the appeal process, so the process is still, I won't say working, but is still in
Functioning.
process, right? What did the committee find? Why would this book only be appropriate for high school and not junior high or elementary?
The only official statement we have from the committee at this point is that it was just deemed based on the language that we cited in our policy, which is that language from the USBE model policy. That language, we would benefit, and committee members, we would benefit from additional clarity in the law on that, from additional support to say, here's how this designation should be made.
And what
That
was
would
that
help
language?
us.
Is it the
It-
one we've read, serious literary, artistic, political, or
So
scientific
in the
value?
policy that I handed you, and there's just some minor wording differences between USBE model policy. It's on page 6,
Yeah.
and it's section 348 and 349.
Yeah, so it says must make the material taken as a whole or and consider whether it has serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value for minors. I mean, I think about in my house on Sunday, specifically on Sunday, and my kids are a little bit older now, but we would turn on popular movies. Joseph, King of Dreams, there's movies about Moses. VeggieTales, you ever seen VeggieTales? Probably when your kids were young. Pretty serious values and at the core. And I would hope that your policy quickly changes so that the board has immediate power to say, this is bogus. Now, if there's another book out there that there is no other book that has anything comparable to the Bible. Political values, our country was founded on these principles, the most referred to and important document by our founders. Artistic, I've sat in Italy and looked at the Sistine Chapel and looked at the statue of David, and even though he's not dressed, which could seem slightly pornographic to some, but I've sat there in these venues around the world and seen the value of what the Bible brings. And I think as a school board, you need to seriously consider this and make these changes. The Bible does have some things that are questionable, but they're implicit, not explicit. There's no detail. Some of these laws that we've written, as I've read them, I had to go to a dictionary and understand what these words even meant. And one of the words I can't remember now, but it was a swollen condition of genitalia. And it was a word I'd never known until, and I still don't know because I can't remember it. But the Bible and some of these things, they are core to us. And as you mentioned, our kids aren't going to the library to check out the Bible. But the statement that we make is so powerful that we have to stand up. The community standard of Utah, of Davis County. We must stand for these things. I think there's a feeling out in our society now that we have separation of church and state. And I ask you, was it in the Declaration of Independence or in the Constitution where it talks about separation of state?
Neither.
Neither. Most people don't know that. And it's kind of a trick question. But it simply means that the state doesn't support a specific religion. And by doing some of these things, we find ourselves in a position where we seem to be joining the band of people who are trying to separate. And in fact, what we're doing is we're accepting the religion of atheism and of hedonism and so many other negative things. So I implore you to take these things back as a board, and hopefully other boards will follow your good lead and make these wrongs right. Thanks.
Thank you, Representative. We'll go to Senator Andrag.
Thank you very much. Quick question for you guys, and then I have a final thought. In your policy and your procedures, is it possible for the same book to be challenged multiple times, and do you have to then go through the same vetting process each time, or is there a, once it's been reviewed, it's been reviewed?
Yeah, great question. So we anticipated that being a potential situation because one side's never going to be happy with the outcome. So there's a 3-year limitation once it's hit that final decision. We felt like that allowed for shifts in the board. If there's a change in accountability, it changes in the library system, things like that. But there is a 3-year stop. I don't know what other districts across the state look like. But we didn't want to get into this continuous cycle of reviewing books that have been excluded from our libraries.
Well, I think my takeaway from today's discussion is specific to your policies and procedures for review, trying to comply with the statute. Number one, that you should strongly consider a direct intervention from the board as part of this process. The second thing is, as much as I personally think it's a very difficult task to determine what your criteria ought to be, once again, like I stated before, I don't know how you split the baby. No matter how you split it, you're going to make someone angry, period, and that's always the case. However, as part of that process, it appears, based upon the examples that were shared today and people's interest and fervor about it, that the standards of whatever criteria was used was somehow missed on the one example that was retained, and then somehow was missed on the other side for literary value. And so it appears to me that your policy needs to be relooked at. And there needs to be probably some training and some guidance provided depending on whatever you come up with, which I'm acknowledging right here is probably an impossible task. Whatever that is, you need to figure out a way to make sure that it's uniformly followed, with the relief valve of the board having a direct intervention, still following your appeals process. And I would imagine that such intervention, direct, that would bypass the appeals process would be rare, but still necessary based upon what public sentiment and you'll never get this right? Based upon the majority of your constituents, or maybe those that are the most vocal of your constituents. But that's my takeaway from this. I concur and agree with my colleagues 100% that this seems to have been a miscarriage of intent. And I feel actually heartfelt anguish over what's going on with this. This is actually a very difficult thing. So to that end, those would be my takeaways, that you make sure that you figure out how to do this. If you're going to have this process in place, it has to be uniform. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you for that, Senator Andrag. Quickly, before we go to Senator Escamilla is online, I'd like to make a motion with the committee. Could we get a support for opening a bill file to address this item, particularly under the context of review committees that are unelected making the final decision? I think any decision that is made by a review committee should, under the law, have to go to an elected board before that book becomes banned? To the motion, Senator Kwan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a clarifying question there. Are you suggesting that the law that is in place that creates the committee, that committee would be abolished instead of having no? So, okay.
No. Okay, Senator Brammer will make a motion.
I think I can capture this. I'd make a motion that we open a bill file to specifically direct that a decision on a final decision before action is taken has to go to the elected body. They can have as many committees as they want, they can have whatever criteria they want, but there's only one elected school board. And let the elected officials step up to the plate, make the decision, and then bear the consequences of that decision. That way you don't get the smut that we saw approved and the Bible disapproved and pointing fingers, but they're different committees, different criteria, whatever. That way you'll have the consistent standard that the board is reviewing the criteria from whatever number of committees you have on whatever the individual facts of whatever literary text you're looking at. You'll have one consistent standard, and that is the standard of the elected officials taking the responsibility for their decision.
Discussion to that item, Senator Andrade.
Yeah, I would support the motion, but may I make a suggestion of a slight amendment that in this process, that there is a notice and disclosure process included with
I
it.
think that, yeah, we'll get that. That's kind of detail in the bill, the how-to.
Exactly.
30,000-foot view on the motion, to give you the context of it. We'll bring it back and refine it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Kwan, did you have a comment, discussion?
Thank you
Senator
for the
Kwan, does
clarification.
that clarify it?
It does, thank you.
Thank you.
Just as we have to make the decisions through our vote on the floor, this would require the board to make the decision. That way, the superintendent, the lottery-drawn committees, whatever, they can provide input, but the ultimate accountability rests with the elected officials.
And then Representative Strong.
I think Senator Brammer made, Senator Bramble made the motion. That's what I was going to do. So.
Okay. All right. We have a second. All those in favor of the... We'll make the motion first. Senator Escamilla, do you want to speak to this item or just speak to the item as a whole? Do you want to speak to this motion?
I'm okay with the motion moving.
Okay.
I want to make a point to the
Great.
later.
Great. So we will vote on this now. All those in favor of opening a bill file on this matter, please say aye.
Aye.
And any who oppose? Chair rules that passes unanimously. Senator Escamilla, would you like to say a few words before we adjourn?
Yes, and thank you, Madam Chair, because I know we're over the time. I just want to thank Davis School District for being here today and being put on the spot. You're probably not the only one, and we'll probably be facing more of this. And you happen to be the first one that had that interesting challenge with that request. I will say that to me, it seems like you were moving towards a direction of what we will be very clear now on statute through a bill that we think the elected board should be accountable and be making that final decision. I just want to add that in this conversation and this exercise, which is not unique to Utah, I think everyone around the country is facing this. Who makes the final call? I almost wonder if we've been also educated on the cost of having some of this stuff implemented. And I think if the state is so committed into protecting children's access to certain information, on the eyes of the beholder may look different. I think there's the extremes that are very obvious, as Senator Bramble explained. There's some stuff that's just common sense. And then others that may be more, again, pending the individual and that family. I would like to also maybe in the future, as we continue this conversation, to get more information on the cost of implementing this type of systemic assessment issues, because 50 books being reviewed, I mean, that's not an easy task, and that's just one school district. And so I would just say I'm interested in hearing more of just implementation, because unfunded mandates are also a problem to me. And if we are going to be this committed, then let's put our money where our mouth is and start then putting infrastructure in place for the entire education system. This is not only a Davis School District issue. This clearly will become an issue across the state of Utah. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And again, thank you so much, Davis School District, for being here. To the public that came and wished to give public comment, I do apologize. We are well past our typical 2 hours of a meeting. This discussion will be happening in another way with the Education Committee on Wednesday. So I would encourage you, if you have things to share, please come to that meeting, as well as you can always email committee members. Call us, text us, email us, and make sure your voice is heard that way as well. And with that, I will entertain one final motion. Senator Bramble, motion to adjourn. All in favor? We are adjourned.